welcome to the Muslim Street. Muslim Street, you can find us at www.themuslimstreet.com. We are being engineered and produced out of Accra, Ghana, by Lance Scurv and the Lance Scurv Show. That's a good-looking brother down on the right with the bald head. He's from Harlem, New York, originally, now residing in Africa, Ghana. We got to hear Lance. We're gonna do a show on this, man. I really want to just kind of get down to this repatriation of Black people in America to the African continent, just to see how that is going. You know,
I'm ready when you are, brother. Just give the word.
Only on a social integration perspective, which I think may be a little more important than the political influence. So we're gonna talk about that one time. All right. So Lance Scurv out of somewhere in the mountains of I'm not even gonna pronounce it. I said Abori. He says Abari. I don't know what he's talking about. So again, we have with us on this broadcast dealing with a very timely subject, a transition to Black leadership. Dr. Viper Issa White, who's also running for a political office coming up in the next congressional races, November of 2026. Dr. White, before we leave the show, please leave a link so that the audience can connect with you, donate with you, kind of understand where they can go to your website to understand your viewpoints and your perspectives as you move into running for Congress. And you know, it's very important that as we look at the Congress as it relates to Black voices and Black ideas, what's really going on. So we need to do a show on that too, right?
Yes, thank you.
The also author of Blacklisted, The Price for Speaking the Truth, former professor at the University of Illinois in Springfield, Ohio State University, also at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Also, we have with us Art Mobley. Art Mobley is a founding member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Also a co-convener of the Darfur 23, which kind of spearheads some of the discussion that we're going to have today on the subject of the transition to Black leadership. So I'd just like to start briefly by saying, by giving a quote from Nancy Morehome, who was a Black Cuban lady during the revolution. She said, "The task of the intellectual is not to debate battles, to join them where the people waged them." And another quote from Dr. Conrad Worrell, Chairman Emeritus of the National Black Man Front, founded back in 1980, along with Reverend Herbert Daughtry out of New York. I think for Dr. Worrell, who said in 2016, and it was a repeated theme of his throughout his life, passed away during COVID. Dr. Worrell said that our battle is for the minds of Black people. So as we move into this discussion of the transition to Black leadership, Dr. Worrell also said back in 2016 in an interview on the exit of Barack Obama's White House that the Black liberation struggle here in the United States was in a lull. It had peaks. It was in a valley. The peak period of the one of the last peak periods of the Black liberation struggle obviously is owned by the 1960s, moving into the early 70s, where there was a clarion call for Black power, a clarion call for independence, anti-assimilation into the American white power structure, or this quote unquote patriotism, a rejection of what we call democratic power politics. That is not to say the Democrat Party, but democratic power politics that was forced on us on the exit of slavery with the 15th Amendment. They didn't ask us when slavery ended whether or not we wanted to be Americans. They just heaped that on us. Since then, and this is the setup for part of the setup for this discussion, is that Black leadership went into two different directions immediately. You had the Frederick Douglass branch, who sought assimilation into the United States as a way, immediately during Reconstruction, we had over 20 members in Congress. We had black governors around the state of Louisiana, et cetera. And then, of course, 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes against Tilden, the Southern Compromise. This is the closest presidential race that the United States had ever experienced. And the Democrats and Republicans got together and said, look, we're going to give access to the North, to the Southern economies, which was a continuation of slavery, i.e., Jim Crow and sharecropping. And at the same time, we would let you have that election. And this is what happened. That part of that was the removing of federal troops from the South, basically stopping the protection of blacks for the access into the enterprise, particularly the 15th Amendment. And then we saw the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, white citizen councils, and other terrorist groups in this country that black people then began to fight against in order to get that quote unquote right to vote. And this is where you hear this idea, Art, of, our people died for the right to vote. Well, yeah, okay. So the other theme that I like to set up with this concept and argument around the transition of black leadership is very important. In 2007, we convened the Darfur 23, a group of Black Americans on the banks of the Nile River in Khartoum in Sudan. And what we maintained at that point, not only was there a significant lull or a valley in what Dr. World talked about in the Black liberation struggle, it was basically almost dead. And we have to be honest about that. Coming out of the Million Man March in 1995, there was extreme energy, but there was also an extreme attack by the United States government and what I like to call the second wave of the counterintelligence program on the Black liberation struggle, in particular, Minister Louis Farrakhan and the entire infrastructure that made 1995 and the Million Man March happen. We know this. Why? Because there's some external forces that took place out of our control in the late 80s, early 90s, with the fall of the Soviet Union. When the fall of the Soviet Union happened, the company, also known as the CIA, according to John Stockwell, he writes in Search of Enemies in 1988, a large influx of those CIA officers were unemployed and they came home under the guise of the FBI, and they began to as the number one issue was to dismantle the Black liberation struggle. And that rise that we saw and that was being put together, Dr. White, in the foundation of the 1980s. We saw coming together of the radical Black tradition with Chokwe Lumumba and Omari Obadeli of the Republic of New Africa. We saw, as I mentioned, Dr. Conroy World and J2 Wausi, Preston Wilcox, National Black United Front. Dr. Oba T'Chaka writes one of the most important pieces that becomes an anthem, I think, for the 1980s, and that's the political legacy of Malcolm X in 1983. So all of these militant Black radical tradition forces are coming back together after being defeated in the 1970s by COINTELPRO. That jailed the Black Liberation Army, Dorob Ben Wahad, Sundiata Kohli, Chase Asada Shakur offshore, right? And so it brought us to a point of the early 2000s where we began to feel this. We saw a surge at the beginning of the 2000s around reparations, where large rallies were had by this Black radical tradition perspective in the Black community, but I think, as Dr. World said, we went into the valley, right? A lull. So, last thing I'll say before I bring Art Mobley in to add his commentary on this issue of the transition of Black leadership, I pointed out that there were 23 Africans in America who found themselves in Sudan to help bring consciousness and understanding to the struggle on the African continent to help prevent a major crisis that was happening over there. And what we found in that situation, and when I came back, I began to write extensively in blogs, radio shows, commentaries. You can find them on the internet on this one subject. I think I even came on the Lance Scurv show on the one subject of the transition of Black leadership. So literally in 2007, nearly 20 years ago, we began to raise this alarm. And it was not, and most people, and I didn't correct them because, we live in an age where there was this explosion of the internet. And one of the things that bothers me mostly, Dr. White, you being an academic, is the stealing of intellectual property. People will take your ideas and literally build an organization around it. So I didn't correct them because they got what we were saying about the transition of Black leadership absolutely 100% wrong. They thought we were talking about transitioning people, transitioning mass movements. No, we were talking about the transitioning of ideas. Also, we were talking about the transition of modalities and how we were going to persecute white supremacy, right? Which brought in the Darfur 23 and the introduction of Africa as an apparent resurgence as we talk about the transition of Black leadership. Dr. World goes on to say that we cannot talk about African liberation in the United States unless we talk about the liberation and independence on the African continent. Art Mobley, what you say?
Well, thank you. That was a deep introduction. I hardly know where to begin to jump in to kind of dovetail with what you were saying. But, just stepping back to the premise and the idea of democratic movements in the United States and revolutionary movements in the United States. And then the same thing put into context on the African continent. We've always had this dichotomy, but we've always understood that out of Pan-Africanism, both of these approaches have validity. Both of these approaches are part and parcel of our overall movement. We've always been Pan-Africanists ever since way back, going into prehistory, but more contemporarily since the slave trade and all of the war nonsense that Europe has heaped upon Africa, our response has been a Pan-African response. From Frederick Douglass, as you mentioned, through Marcus Garvey, into what we had as an anti-Jim Crow movement here in the United States, all the way through to the revolutionary national movements, the cultural national movements of others in our midst in the U.S. And at the same time, simultaneously, what was going on in Africa during the same period, a very brutal movement of war against Africa so that you can extract or to set the stage for the extraction of slaves from Africa was a resistance movement on the continent. A lot of people presume that Africans were sitting still while we were in this country being shackled and sold and transitioned into slavery into building this country. Africans on the African continent at that time were being enslaved. There was a slave movement on the African continent that was very, very brutal. We hear about the situations in the Congo and in West Africa where African men were forced to go into the jungle, into the bush, into the rubber tree groves, and bring back X number of bushels of rubber plants and rubber leaves. And if they didn't bring those rubber leaves out, their families were held hostage, and your wife and your children might have their hands cut off or chopped off if you didn't bring back that quota. So it was very brutal what was going on. And we're talking about Michelin and Goodyear, Firestone, all of the rubber companies that were operating in Africa as the auto industry was taking off and needed tires. Those kinds of things were being done in Africa during this same period. But that movement was progressing towards a challenging and standing up against that kind of oppression and that kind of slavery on the continent. So again, jumping back to where we were in the U.S. as we came into the civil rights movement out of Jim Crow, that was a very brutal movement too. The lynchings and all of the things that we have a close feeling and understanding of here in this country were coming to a head that produced the civil rights movement, and then had the very visceral reaction of a revolutionary national movement, which spawned the Black Panthers and came out of the voice of Malcolm X and people like William, who the brother that went down to Cuba, and of course, Fred Hampton and others. They energized and galvanized that movement into something that became, like I said, a visceral response to the brutality. You can't fight brutality nonviolently. It doesn't work. Martin Luther King certainly tried, but it was a try out of necessity. It was a necessary movement. We needed to have a nonviolent side, but at the same time, we needed to understand that the brutality that was being heaped on us was not going to yield because we were nonviolent. It was only going to yield because we met violence with violence. China understood that. India understood that. Russia understood that. Revolutions and wars around the world are fought because it's a response to violence. You can't fight violence with nonviolence. It doesn't work. It ultimately will lead you back to the same point. So again, when we did what we did in this country to move the needle, to move from the civil rights movement towards doing something more radical, the response from the imperial community was very visceral. It was very violent. So at that point, hundreds of leaders were killed. We know about the assassinations, as I mentioned the other week, about Malcolm X and what happened to Dr. King, but there were hundreds of other leaders across the country who were attacked and neutralized in various ways because that was the response. The response was very violent. So where did the movement go after so many of the African American leaders were neutralized? What I recognized was, again, we've got a Pan-African movement. The front lines of that movement just shifted to Africa. And we began to see in the early 60s, and African leadership will tell you, yes, we picked this up from African Americans. You lit the torch and led the way for the opening of the African movements, the revolutionary movements that responded to the same things and the same forces that you were responding to in America. Only you, as a minority in America, were inundated with a very violent reaction and response. We on the African continent had more of the freedom to move those efforts forward without having to be we were not in the minority. We were the majority. Africa was a sea of blackness, and all you needed to do was to mobilize that sea of blackness. So that's where the revolutionary movements that led into what happened in the Patriotic Front in Mozambique and Angola and Zimbabwe and South Africa at that particular time. That's why there was so much energy in that movement, is that Africans were free to organize and structure not only a movement, but also structure armies. They were able to bring Kwame Nkrumah's words to life of starting an all-African people's army in Africa and to be able to fight physically against what was going on in Southern Africa. And those revolutions made a lot of ground, gained a lot of ground. So where we are now is that the transition back into accepting the idea of democracy has put us back into a neo-colonial state or a quasi-neo-colonial state. And that happens because you take the leadership, the real leadership of those people who led those revolutionary movements, and you set them aside and say, okay, you have to run for an office now. You have to go from being that military leader to being a leader that runs for an office. And we're going to have a slate of candidates. They're going to run against you, and we're going to have a democracy now. Democracy means that we all get to vote. Well, if you notice, look around the world, how those counter imperial democracies work, you don't find that kind of robust idea of electioneering and that kind of democracy. It doesn't manifest itself that way. You have a party in China, and the party selects a leader, and then that leader will lead for a long time, as long as he is doing the right thing. You have the same thing happening in India now and Russia, where these leadership positions are taken on by people who not only understand and know what they're doing, they've got the background and experience of having led and put their lives on the line so that that leadership is tried by fire and proven that this is a leader. This is a person that we're going to listen to. Fidel Castro in Cuba tried to relinquish power and leave his leadership position a number of different times. But the people said, no, you're not going anywhere, brother. You know, you are the leader. You are the leader by example. You are the leader by what you've done to this point. You can't leave us and you know, throw us into
Let me make a statement in here. I agree with you 100%. And that comes up now to the element of what does leadership look like? You see, and this is where we have a problem. This is one of the few times in the history of the African in the United States that we haven't had what I call an acceptable a core or cadre of real leadership. What I mean by that, first you were going into the early 18th century. During that period, we had people like Paul Coffey. All right, Paul Coffey, he pushed an idea of taking people back to Sierra Leone. He was part of every movement. He was a whaler. He was a businessman. In fact, he took 38 people back to Africa, to Sierra Leone. That means he was an organizer. Then we have, along with this, we have Henry McNeill Turner, who was part of the American Colonization Society, who was involved in trying to take people back to Liberia in 1847. He is also one of the founding members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And this is very important to make because the church, unlike the churches now, was started in a revolutionary fashion, going against the Methodist Church that was isolating and segregating African Americans who wanted to worship their God. So we see that type of thing. Then I think Malik talked about the whole element of democracy, and you did too. And we have to understand that while we had these types of leaders, by the mid-19th century, the majority of African Americans wanted to be part of America. Now note, they had, for most of them, they had lost consciousness of what it was. Even when we go back to the Haitian Revolution of 1803, right? Their motto was the empire. Their motto was the empire, trying to be like the French. And they had dukes and they had lords and so forth. They had lost the element of consciousness.
Are you talking about the Haitian Revolution after Dessalines?
Yeah. And Toussaint Overture. Yeah. But let me finish up. Then here now, this is one of the first times, again, one of the few times in American history where we as people of African descent do not have, again, viable in the cadre of leadership. Now, what does this leadership look like? Now, leadership has to be a time whereby our people can organize. We don't have people who can organize and lead marches and develop institutions. I mean, you have people like Al Sharpton, he can't build nothing. You have Ben Crump, he's an ambulance chaser. He can't build anything. You have people like Hakeem Jeffries. He's a political leader. He can't do nothing. All right. The leadership that we lack now are people like a King, like a Malcolm X, like
Ibrahim Traoré in
but
Burkina Faso.
He's still a little bit different because remember, he came out of the military, right? He came out of the military and he was part of a structure. He did not start from the grassroots. He formed something in opposition that was going somewhere. I'm talking about development in the underclass, whereby, for example, again, Robert Williams, we don't have that. Jesse Jackson, he's an old man. He's in a hospital this week. We don't have that any longer. Khalid Muhammad, we don't have that. And you're absolutely right, Arthur. They have given us a perspective of what leadership is, and that is voting, following the Democratic line, following the Republican line, and we say these are leaders. These are not leaders for the most part.
Well,
they're charlatans and big heads. Yeah,
brother. The leaders that you're mentioning. I mean, we discussed that most of our real leadership, our true leadership, was neutralized during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So you're talking about the remnants and the leftovers who were available voices who tried to fill a void and tried to fill a vacuum left by real leadership, which was killed and, like I said, liquidated, jailed, run out of the country, whatever the situation was. So if you're not free to form leadership organizations and leadership parties, then you're going to get remnants. You're going to get leftovers. You're going to get those second stage leaders that you're talking about. So coming up on almost half past the hour. You're listening to The Muslim Street. You can find us at www.themuslimstreet.com. There's some great articles that you can read and also participate. Please like and subscribe. You can find us across YouTube, Facebook, and all other social media. Dr. White, and also after you address this, to offer the same question to Art Mobley, .423, and that is two things. One, because remember, I set the monologue up with talking about these two different directions right out of slavery. One, the Frederick Douglass wing of the movement went toward assimilation, and we already have defined on previous shows
the Black radical tradition that rejected that. And Dr. White touched on some of those movements. I actually during the antebellum South. One person is not given a lot of credit as we expand our thought and process and practices into the Pan-African construct is Henry Sylvester Williams. He's the one that organized the first Pan-African conference in 1900. The Du Bois, along with Padmore, George Padmore, organized in 1920 what was known as the Pan-African Congress. Very different in terms of a conference being a conference and a Congress being, more of an infrastructure moving forward. And we saw what happened at the Fifth Pan-African Congress in 1945 in the UK, where it began to put pressure externally on the colonialist forces. And by 15 years later, colonialism was dismantled. We celebrated the year of 1960 as the year Africa, where 2/3 of the African continent was free. Here's the question. Today, we have over 10,000 coming out of the Frederick Douglass wing of the movement, 10,000 Black elected officials. In the late 1970s, Stokes, we saw early 1970s with Stokes in Cleveland, with Mayor Richard Hatchett in early 1970s in Gary, Indiana, Coleman in Detroit, Mayor Washington in Chicago, Wilson Goode in Philadelphia, so on and so on. Black mayors had controlled all of the tier 1 and tier 2 cities in the United States. Mm-hmm. Today, over 10,000 Black elected officials, and we are in a law. That didn't work. That modality, as we talk about the transition to Black leadership, does not work. Democratic power politics. Can we discuss that? I'd like to throw that out to you guys to chew it up and talk about it, Dr. White, and then if you can jump in.
Yeah, first of all, when we look at the Black political leaders, let's say from late 1950s to around maybe like the 1980s, there's one thing they had in common is they were at the local or state, and even some of them who, like Adam Clayton Powell, got into the federal level. They all had a consciousness of Blackness. All right, and for the most part, they did not push a party agenda. That's the difference. They were in the party, but they did not push a party agenda. Remember, all of them, even people like Fannie Lou Hamer, they fought against the establishment. They fought and argued that the establishment had locked the African American community out, and they were going to bore within, not to be a member of that group, but to use that group as a vehicle to make things occur for them. Then we begin to see a change. And I see this change approximately taking place with people like a Bill Clinton era. All right, they started liking him, started calling him America's first Black president. Remember that foolishness?
Yes.
All right. Then he started cozying up to the African American community. Then he started pushing an agenda, a political democratic agenda that the African American leaders swallowed and digested and began to vomit it out to their constituents. Completely different. So now, instead of fighting for the community, the Democrats are now, well, we're fighting against the Republicans. All right? We're fighting against their policies. You see, it changes the whole dynamics. And it's very interesting because other groups don't do this. I mean, when you look at the Jewish community, we got a lot of problems with them. But you don't hear them talking about they're fighting against the policies of a political party. Their agenda is within the Democrat, Republican, or Independent. You see the same thing with Indians, Pakistanians. But we, as the Black community, we have identified an element that the party is our vocal point, is our vehicle, and that we speak for them and they speak for us. And that's a sign of lunacy. That's a sign of a bipolar community, and that's a sign of a slave community.
Hey, Dr. White, Art, before you jump in and respond to my larger question, 10,000, over 10,000 Black elected officials. Blacks ran every tier 1 and tier 2 city from a mayoral perspective and an automatic perspective in this country for decades, right? And no progress. Right. Before we get to that, Dr. White brought up a period of conjunction. I want to throw a couple of things in your response, Art, and that is he mentioned during the Clinton administration and the Black elected officials buying into the Democratic Party's agenda as opposed to a Black agenda. Two significant things happened in the middle of that decade in the 1990s. One is, and I think I mentioned this one first. One is the Congressional Black Caucus signed on wholeheartedly to the 1994 Joe Biden scripted crime bill.
Right.
Crime bill that sent hundreds of thousands of Black people to prison, right? Number one. So the Congressional Black Caucus literally signed off on that, right? So when you talk about the failure of Black politics in the context of Dr. White's statement that they adopted the Democratic agenda as opposed to a Black agenda. The second thing, Dr. White, that I want to mention, and I want Art to because he was there in 1995, the lead up to the Million Man March, a few years coming a little early, but definitely culminating with that. Minister Louis Farrakhan formed a holy alliance with the Congressional Black Caucus, led by Kwame Nkrumah, who also signed on to that 1994 crime bill, and who was also on the payroll of the Zionists and AIPAC and supporting that genocide. And I just want to say this before Art jumps in what I said. If you find any Black people who are supporting Israel in the context of this genocide that's going on against the Palestinians, not only are you sick, not only are you Uncle Toms, not only are you sellouts, right? But you're also anti-Muslim. You're also anti-Black, right? To support, isn't it, sorry, it's terrible what Hamas did on October 7th. I mean, what last book you read, right? I mean, you're going to buy that BS from CNN, and we're talking about your consciousness. We're talking about what Dr. Conrad World said, the battle is for the minds of our people. Get your minds out of the people of your enemies, right? A cursory glance at history will tell you what happened in 1948. Supported by the United States and Britain, it's called the Nakba. 750,000 Palestinian Muslims chased from their land, murdered by the same people that you support. Oh, it happened on October the 7th. We need more October the 7th. So if you any of those people, don't ever call me on my phone. If you see me on the street at the mall buying some peppermints or a lunch, just pass by me. I swear, you make me sick. Art.
Yes, well, we got a Nakba going on right now in Sudan. We got a Nakba going on in Congo. We have some very serious problems on the African continent. War has not ended on the African continent since the 1500s, and it's been continuous, and it's been very brutal. We don't hear about it. It doesn't make the news on this side of the ocean. But what you were saying about the way we handle and we deal with democracy in this country is a remnant, and it's a leftover from a long history of what we are coming out of in terms of Jim Crow and the limitations of how African Americans can operate in this country. You only have a very small lane that you can walk through. If you step outside of that lane, you're going to be vilified. You're going to be essentially threatened, and lifestyles are going to be crushed and diminished because you're not supposed to get out of that lane. So we know what that lane is. And all of the leaders that you mentioned in this country, Dr. White, who are, again, making themselves present and posturing themselves as leaders right now, have to stay have to stay in those lanes. Same ones you mentioned, Malik, with the Congressional Black Caucus and others who grew out of that system. They know what their lane is. They have to take the money from AIPAC. They have to be in bed with the Democratic Party or the Republican.
See, that's where I disagree. They don't have to be there. They have to show some integrity and some backbone. I mean,
I understand.
We have people like Bobby Rush and Summer Lee and Jasmine Crockett and Maxwell Frost. Every damn one of the Congressional Black Caucus members have taken money.
What are they going to do?
They have been quiet. They have been quiet on Gaza. They have been quiet on the Sudan. And they don't have to take the money. They choose to take the money. All right. We could go other ways. But they that's why all of them are sellouts to the Black community, and they don't deserve even to come into our churches. I mean, Jasmine Crockett doing a little dances in the hallways of Congress. She's a whore for the Jewish for AIPAC. Even Bobby Rush, who's a Black Panther, he took money from them. The heck with him too. All right. Al Sharpton, he's the biggest whore.
Yeah. And I'm saying these are the false leaders. It's kind of like, hey, if you want to get biblical about it, these are the Jezebels. These are the people who have stepped in and replaced and assumed power because of a vacuum, just a vacuum. They just step into the vacuum.
Mr. Mobley, if I may,
yes, ma'am.
And I second you, Doc. During the political parties, there are some that didn't necessarily take from the PAC. Bernie Sanders, even, he created his own PAC for people to be able to donate. He partnered with different communities, because he said that what they were doing was wrong, and it goes against the nature of the people and what they were needing. So what exactly are you?
Yeah,
I'm trying to gain understanding of what you mean.
Didn't take money from AIPAC, but he signed those bills to send more bombs to Israel.
Right. Bernie Sanders is
on it. Bernie's talking that stuff now, but Bernie Sanders, he had an opportunity to be in the forefront of this thing 2 and 3 years ago. He's a punk.
Mm-hmm. Right? But again, we're going to have punks. We're going to have these people step up because they are limited in what they can do.
As well?
Yeah, this is the positive anyway. Yeah.
Bernie Sanders is a Zionist Jew.
Bernie Sanders is a closet Zionist at best, But I understand, again, because these people assume this vacuum, and we're looking for leadership in a vacuum, and this is what we get. This is why I said our leadership shifted from the U.S. We don't have any leadership, African Americans. We don't have a progressive leadership. We don't have a revolutionary national leadership in the U.S. It shifted to Africa. It shifted to Africa because it had to. It had to survive. The Pan-African movement shifted to Africa. So you look at the leadership that's on the continent now, and I know we have these egos in us African American ideals that say, oh, well, we started this and we did this and we chopped this much cotton and we built this country, and we want to stand on all those things. It's wonderful. Yeah, you did that. But that is not leadership. Leadership in developing your oppressors' structures is not leadership. So we are looking to, in the Pan-African movement, what is disintegrating our oppressors' structures. So we look to people like Traoré and Assimi Goïta and many of the African leaders who are on the continent, Julius down in South Africa. We've watched and really honored a lot of people from Patrice Lumumba all the way to Robert Mugabe. And we said, those brothers had the right idea. They were pushing for the right things. They're trying to move the needle on the progress overall for African people wherever they are. African people around the world, including here in the U.S. We have to have leadership that we can be inspired by and that we can move forward through and get things done. So we have to support those leaderships, and we want to feed into those ideas here on the Muslim street. We want to feed those ideas where true leadership can grow and flourish, and we can respond to that leadership.
So who would you say has the best grassroots model, or has not taken from the packs, or had any
here in the US,
yeah,
we don't have any such people. I mean, I would take them all and put them in a basket and just sit them to the side. You know, we just don't have those leadership. Now, again, people expect that when those leadership elements arise, everybody's going to rush and do a press conference with them and stick a microphone in front of them and say, "Oh, you, that's great ideas. You know, we want to hear from you. You know, we want what's your doctrine? You know, where's this coming from?" They're not going to do that. You're not going to hear from those leaders. But we know those leaders. We know that they're in our communities. We know who they are.
Yeah,
but
Dr. White. Yeah, Dr. White. If I can just cut in, I pointed out that the mid '90s, and I'd like for you to address this period, because I think it's a very a significant period in the transition of our leadership and how we got to this law in our movement. And that is, I pointed out two things. One, that the Congressional Black Caucus leading up to the Million Man March, where over 2 million Black men showed up, stunned America. Okay. That the Congressional Black Caucus formed the Holy Alliance with Minister Louis Farrakhan, and then sold him out post Million Man March, right? I pointed out, and you also pointed out how this in my eyes, they supported and signed off on the 1994 crime bill, even at the behest of Reverend Jesse Jackson, who went before Congress and warned them not to sign that bill, even him, right? Now, this period, I want just kind of stay in this period as I talk about the this whole transition in our movement. I think it's a very critical point. The sellout of the CBC, the Minister Louis Farrakhan, they literally, Kwasi and Fume led that charge with the rest of his cohorts, right? And then the buy down on the crime bill being a significant part. Can you speak into that period and its effects on our movement today?
Yes, first of all, you're absolutely right about 1995 and the Million Man March. Now, during that time, leading up to it and after it especially, the litmus test for Black leadership was based on Louis Farrakhan. Do you support him? Do you like him? Do you honor him? If you said you did, you were blacklisted, you were ostracized, you were polarized. If you said that you was against him and that he was an anti-Semite and that the Nation of Islam and the Black Muslims, they were not true Muslims and they were anti-American, then you were elevated. You see, that at the same time, there was a systematic attack on other people like him. Khalid Muhammad, the attack on him. You have the attack against Hakeem Adabuti. You have the attack against Omar Ali. You have the attack against so many African-American leaders who had this revolutionary thought. Then from 1997 throughout much of the new century, for about 10, 15 years, those types of voices were isolated. They weren't on American campuses, college campuses. They didn't get the media. Now, keep a note, when during the 1990s, when Minister Farrakhan spoke, he was getting 30 and 40,000 people. In fact, at the Atlanta Dome, you were there, Malik, over 80,000 people. In fact, many of us who were just local, I mean, Malik at the time could pull in 500, 600 people himself, just to listen to him. You see, so there was an attack on us, blacklisted us. Then they reframed, Malik, what a leader, a Black leader, was. That is, be responsible, be nice, be genteel, say that the Nation of Islam, say that the new Black Panther Party, say that any revolutionary individual like Arthur was out of step. all right, and it's a new time, and that they would create these type of people like Malik, myself, Arthur, and Farrakhan and others. We would create a new negative dynamic. That's what they pushed. So now Farrakhan is 92. You know, he's on his way out. Jesse Jackson was in the hospital. He's on his way out. Khalid Muhammad, he's gone. Robert Williams, he's gone. And so who's there? Fake leaders like Ben Crump and Al Sharpton. So that goes back to what Arthur's saying, that we have to rebuild because we lost our models.
I wasn't saying that we had to rebuild in this country. We just need to look to where the leadership is. We are a global dynamic. We are a Pan-African movement. We need to understand that just because all of your leaders were assassinated in this country, and the rest of the people are terrified that they will be assassinated, so they shut up and they do things like Minister Louis Farrakhan was offered from Muammar Gaddafi $5 billion and attempted to put that money on the table when the State Department and the U.S. government said, you bet not take that money. You bet not touch that money. No, you cannot onboard those funds into the African American community. So we have been restricted at every level from doing the things that would signify and signal to the masses of Black people across this country that we have a path, we have a way to go, that we can move the needle, so to speak, on the oppression that we experience in this country and gain at least some traction. But that traction is being gained when you look at what is going on in Africa, and people are winning back large segments of land and territory, and that is coming under Black control, and resources are coming under Black control, and et cetera, any way that you envision what's going on in Africa. But the fact is, that is where we have to look. We have to look where the leadership is and follow.
Wait, so doctor.
But it only can be looked in that manner. It only can be looked in that manner if the African leadership is investing into the movements in North America. You see, I see the ideological leadership like Kwame Nkrumah's and his book, Consciousness. That's an ideological and a psychological argument, and that's good. However, to really make the pendulum move in the United States, those people, our African brothers, will have to invest in the movement here in the same way as the Arab groups have invested in their leadership and their movements in the United States.
Well, like I was saying about Muammar Gaddafi, he tried to.
But he's not there anymore. But he's not there.
But you understand my point. You know what I'm saying is he tried to give this money, and the State Department stepped in and blocked it and said no. So there are barriers to that happening. So what do we do where those barriers exist? And that's where the Muslim street comes in.
So the question, Dr. White, I'd like to address. And before that, I'm going to support the fact that the Muslim street doesn't engage in, hyperbole. We just don't like saying stuff like you see over the internet. We back everything that we say here with facts, and I'm going to jump on a couple of those. So I think with already saying, Dr. White, and before I ask you to respond to that and close out the program with your commentary, we're coming up on the last 7 minutes here, is that already saying that we have a diaspora, and that the vanguard that was here at its height in our movement from a Pan-African perspective in the 1960s and early 1970s peaked again as we moved up to the Million Man March, sold out by the Black political class. And we documented that here. Has now moved to the African continent. It has not forgotten about the diaspora. We have to take our place, and I'd like you to address that. But before I do that, just to kind of support some of the things that you said earlier in terms of facts and that is when I led the Darfur 23 and called for the Darfur 23 on the banks of the Nile River in Khartoum in Sudan. At the same time, we were there to bring about and try to hold together a very fragile peace agreement that was negotiated in Abuja in 2005. This is 2007, May. We find as the State Department, the United States State Department, was spreading propaganda in Sudan while we were there and following us all over the country as we met with the Prime Minister, as we met with some of the rebel groups, as we met with the Chinese who were helping to develop the oil refineries. The Black political class, Charles Rangel and Bobby Rush, were on the White House lawn with George Bush, who was anti-Black, anti-African, right? On the White House lawn at the same time we were there. In May of 2007, go check your records. They were on the White House lawn signing a agreement to further put sanctions on Sudan. I mean, here we are. We talked about the lack of agenda being with the Congressional Black Caucus. Both of these were members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Charles Rangel and Bobby Rush. They were partnering with white power, and we were partnering with the African continent to disseminate proper information, hold together a peace agreement that would save millions of lives. And these sellouts were doing the opposite. And at the same time, Bobby Rush took $1 million from took $1 million. I'm being hacked here, guys. He took $1 million from AT&T in 2007 to further his sellout agenda. This is what they're up to.
Mr. Malik.
Wait. Before I bring on Dr. White to close out, he talked about Al Sharpton being a sellout. Al Sharpton was broke in 2010. Go check his records in 2011. He was filing bankruptcy. And in February of 2011, he got a check from somebody he didn't even support for president. He supported Hillary Clinton in 2008, not Barack Obama. Barack Obama wrote him a check for $25 million, February of 2011. If you doubt what I'm saying, go look at who was at his conference, his National Action Network conference, as a keynote speaker in 2010. He had a principal of a school in Ohio. Go look at who was the keynote speaker in 2011. It was Barack Obama, who brought his entire staff, along with the staff from the previous administration. Bill Clinton spoke at that conference. Hillary Clinton spoke at that conference. He had his Zionists there, who ran his White House, who spoke at that conference. Rahm Emanuel, who has membership, citizenship in Israel. This is what we're facing. If you got a president, first Black president of the United States, going to write a $25 million check to a sellout leader in order to compromise him, and you wonder why he has a TV show on MSNBC and he got that show 3 months later. This is not an accident. Dr. White, close it out.
Well, first of all, I mean, you're absolutely right about Al Sharpton. He's also a stooge for the Department of Justice. He works with them, trying to isolate and try to hurt our community. But we do have something else that's coming up, and that is tomorrow night. The Nation of Islam, Minister Farrakhan, who is the patriarch of our movement, he's still around, 91, 92 years old. He's calling for a national men's meeting at 8 o'clock Eastern time. Now, whatever we think about him, he is the crown. He's the chief on this, and we should go out there to listen to him. And every city, every village, every church should tune in tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern time. You can get it on noi.org. All right? I mean, because he's in his old age, he sees that there is a problem of leadership and that we have to get back to our glory and reconquer our community and lead our people again. Because right now, we're on the verge of, I think a song years ago, on the verge of destruction. You know that song, Lance? Yeah, we're on the verge of destruction. So we have to get there. We have to stop following people like Ben Crump, Al Sharpton, Skip Gates, You know, even though I like Cornel West, he's not an organizer. All right, we have to get with people who can really build. And I again, I suggest, brother Arthur. It is what we are. I want to thank you, brother. Continue to read Blacklisted: The Price of Speaking Truth, and let's do it tomorrow night after the show, after Farrakhan speaks.
Yeah, let's have a artist who could join. Lance, you can set up a just an impromptu podcast right after Minister Farrakhan's address to the nation, Black men only. I think that'd be great. Art was a big supporter of the Million Man March and the local organizing committees that affected the Black community years and years and years after that. I want to thank you for joining the Muslim Street for Art Mobley and the National Association of Black Journalists, Dr. Piper Issa White, running for Congress. Make sure we get that link and an article up on the Muslim Street. Lance Gurr, producing our show from Accra, Ghana. It's a pleasure, man, to be producing that, man. Africa for the Africans. Lance is living it. Lance is not only talking it, Art, he's living it, man. Can you believe it? Look how good he looks, man. Lance is like 85 years old.
Yeah.
I'm still the greatest of all times.
95 years old. And look how good he looks, man. When you see him again, he's going to be 105 years old. Everybody, thanks for joining the Muslim Street.
Alaikum.
www.muslimstreet.com. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.